Hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'm Dan Stilgo, Marketing Manager at Blend, joined today by Phil Valander, usual guest here, and co-host maybe, co-founder at Blend as well. Today we're covering a very popular topic actually, lead generation versus demand generation. A very popular debate that's risen over the last kind of 3, 4, 5 years maybe. It's an interesting one, but just instead of actually talking theoretically about these differences and how the two methodologies work, we're going to pair our experiences and learnings with real data from HockeyStack's report, which if you haven't checked out yet, I definitely would. We're going to share it live here as we kind of go through. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, Phil, I know we've spoken about lead gen versus demand gen quite a few times, and it's probably become, would you say, more prominent, like as a topic in terms of businesses that you're talking to?
Yeah,
things like that.
Yeah, awareness is growing, traction is growing, understanding is growing, and yet there's still an awful lot of there's a long way to go, and there's an awful lot of opportunity out there. And I'm always pleased to look at it through a data lens and really see what's possible. So I'm really excited to start doing that today, and glad to be here.
Yeah, it will be an interesting discussion for sure. And yeah, I suppose on that point, like whilst there has been individual studies done to look at lead gen versus demand gen, I think of like Cognizant, for example, published a lot of data out there about it. Refine Labs, probably, enough data about it. But HockeyStack saw this gap, I think, to take a larger sample size to do it on a larger scale, which I think is fascinating to look at and really, thank them for doing that in some ways.
Yeah, credit to them for that. And more data is always welcome on this subject, so we're very grateful to have it. As you say, there's a number of really useful studies, reports, and data sets out there, varying sizes. But you can never have too much data with which to understand the subject, but as long as it's digestible, which this report really is. So it's a very welcome addition to what we had available.
Yeah. Cool. Sorry, I was looking down there because I noticed the mic, I think now is working, but after I introduced us, but it's all good now.
Okay.
It's all good. It was originally my laptop mic. It's now these bad boy mics. So we're good.
Hope you heard all that, everyone.
Yeah, I think it was after you started speaking, I changed it just in time. So I think we're good.
All right, let's go.
Let's go. Yeah, but before I do share my screen, run through this report, basically we're going to run through the report, give our insight, input, thinking behind why these things might have happened in the report. Before we do bring it up on screen and run through it, if you do have any questions, as usual, or thoughts as we go through, please do just ask any questions, add any comments to the comments section on LinkedIn, and we can pick them up and talk about them as we go, answer them, all of those good things. So yeah, if you want to, that'd be grand. Right, so let's dive into the report, shall we? So here we go. We've got HockeyStack's report here, which is the final verdict, demand gen versus lead gen. So I'll kind of skip past this intro bit of preamble about why they did it. Kind of similar reasons, right? It hadn't been done before, so they wanted to kind of be the first people to do a study about this on this scale. But actually outlining the methodology and the sample before we get into this, I think is obviously crucial. Understand more about this data and the companies that are used within it is essential. So yeah, I'll kind of just read through some of these important points as we go through. So in terms of definitions used throughout, so demand generation MQLs are defined as direct form submissions like demo requests, pricing page, and contact us. Lead generation MQLs are any form submission that's defined as an MQL in a company's CRM. That can include those things as well, like demo requests, pricing page, contact forms, but it can also include ebook downloads, webinar registrations, things like that. SQL is pipeline created. Simple as, obviously, every company creates pipeline in different ways at different stages. It means different things. It's hard to have a unified pipeline definition.
Indeed.
So it's just pipeline, and I think that's the best you can do here, really. Pipeline ACV is total contract value, deal size, deal value by the number of SQLs. Revenue ACV is total new business revenue added divided by the number of closed won deals, which is known as average contract value. Closed won is closed won deals, net new business, new revenue. And actually getting into the sample now of the companies that were analyzed in this research. So the sample size was 87 B2B SaaS companies with sales-led growth motions. Out of those, there were 48 on the demand gen side, 39 on the lead gen side. And the date range was between October the 1st, 2023 and March the 31st, 2024. So pretty recent.
Yeah.
In terms of attribution model, I'm not sure this is, entirely relevant for this, but worth mentioning nonetheless. It's position-based because this is U-shaped, by the way. If anyone else is wondering, it's also known as that. Because it offers a balanced view on the importance of each touch point. So basically assigns 40% to the first and last interaction and 20% to the remaining middle interactions, basically. Companies in this research also are using HockeyStack and had been since September the 1st, 2023. And in terms of size, this is an important one to look at. So pretty big range here from 5 million ARR to 2 billion ARR. So I imagine that is the lowest and the highest company ARR in this report. So yeah, a good range, I suppose, of companies to look at here. And the average ACV of those was from 10K to 150K. So again, good range. 75% of companies in this report were from North America, 20% from the UK, and 5% from Europe. And with the companies in this report, quite fascinating. So 250,000 MQLs were generated, 270K to be exact, 103.9 million in ad spend with these companies, 500 million created in pipeline, which is 559 million to be exact, and 72 million in revenue. Don't need to worry about the caveat necessarily. If you do want to, obviously look at this in more detail, please do that. Just to clear up definitions as well, actually, on demand gen versus lead gen. And I know they went back and edited this afterwards, which was needed, I think. And yeah, important definitions to be aware of here. So they're defining demand generation companies as companies that don't spend any budget on lead generation campaigns at all. Lead generation companies are defined as lead generation companies that spend at least 50% of their budget on lead gen campaigns. Companies that spent less than 50% of their budget on lead generation campaigns weren't included.
Interesting. There's a lot there. It's great that we have so much information on the methodology and the sample, because of course that plays a big role in what data and insights you get back out. And to the earlier point, we're always very, very glad to receive reports and data like this, because although we have made the shift ourselves from lead generation to demand generation and seen the impact, and although we've seen the positive impact, the problems with lead generation and the positive impact that demand generation can have on pipeline in, a fair number of situations, nevertheless, we still do work with a relatively small sample size of companies. In terms of one-on-one working with them, they all see the same trends and learnings, but it's not a huge sample size. We're not able to speak completely freely about all of their learnings, data, successes and challenges, of course, because that's the nature of the work that we do. And still, sadly, there are quite a lot of marketers and marketing teams who tend to be our main point of contact that don't have access to all the data that's necessary to make the most informed decisions. That can be due to organizational barriers or technology barriers, but it's not unusual to find marketers that still can't look at pipeline and its makeup, revenue and where it came from, and the entire, customer life cycle when it comes to measuring the impact of and deciding their marketing strategy. So this kind of report large sample size, clear methodology, is really, really useful to us to confirm, consolidate, and corroborate what we've seen and what we see happening in the individual cases where we get the opportunity to implement demand generation.
Yeah, good bit of context given there. It is, really good to have a sample size like this to look at, review, and give some thoughts around, really. So let's do that, shall we? Right, let's have a look at the first section there, which they're comparing MQLs from lead generation to demand generation. And let's dive into the data a little bit. So between the time period that they stated, in those 87 companies, they generated 270,000 MQLs, as we mentioned previously. Demand generation motion generated 106,000 of those MQLs. Lead generation generated 164,000 MQLs. I'm not too surprised to see that. So just splitting that out into kind of months and things. On average, the demand generation group generating 371 MQLs a month versus lead gen companies generating 701 MQLs a month. Just to touch on that first, I think, before we go any further, I'm not surprised to see that whatsoever.
No, absolutely not. Although I think it already brings us to one of the main challenges that has hindered marketers in making really smart decisions about how they spend their marketing budget in times gone by, in that I don't think it's right to call lead gen leads MQLs in most cases. MQL, marketing qualified, still contains the word qualified, still implies that there's a degree of qualification, or they're a bit further along the purchase process, based on what we can tell about them and about their behavior. And it's the fact that lead gen leads that might convert on an ebook and might perform a few other actions that get them a certain lead score get bucketed in the same way as those very, very high intent bottom of the funnel MQLs that creates the first point of confusion. And I think it's that point of confusion that has meant lead generation gets mismeasured and is so defended in some cases, because you're not separating out the different types of lead that are in your MQL bucket. If you follow.
Yeah, I'm following.
I think this is demonstrated so often in companies' lead scoring models.
Yeah.
I saw it very, very recently, yet again, where you'll have an organization that's got a marketing automation system, and they'll have a lead score property, and they'll have, a rule set, which is I'm going to give a lead 5 points for this type of behavior and 10 points for that type of behavior. And they'll have this relatively complicated, arbitrary, but complicated lead scoring system. And then if a lead fills in a demo request form, they immediately get 100 points, the score required to be an MQL, and they become an MQL as a result. But they're getting masked. They're getting measured together, grouped together, and assessed together when they are very, very different. And I wish that MQL wasn't used to measure lead generation when we look at data like this, because I think it's misleading.
It's inflating the numbers, like in terms of the success of the lead generation element of this, because it's including essentially everything in demand gen, as far as I'm reading here, because it's including demo requests, contact forms, pricing requests, things like that, as well as the gated content webinar leads. It's actually painting a more positive picture of lead gen.
Exactly. And all the information you need to see that is here, but it's easy to overlook because I think it's a reflex in the marketing mind to group things together, pass them to sales, and measure the conversion rate as a whole. But in reality, we've said it for many, many years now, there's usually two very distinct cohorts inside that MQL set. High intent leads that will turn into an opportunity and close, and low intent leads that most likely won't.
Yeah. You know what? So how many more were there? About 60,000 more MQLs generated from lead gen compared to demand gen. And you know what? It comes down to goals, right? Like that is the goal of a lead generation motion, like quantity over quality in almost most cases. So yeah, just really not surprised to see that. And I don't think marketers kind of in this realm will be either.
What I don't think we can tell from the data set here, correct me if I'm wrong, is what the split is in the lead gen MQL number. How many of those leads are high intent demand leads and how many are low intent, content research leads? I suspect that although the number is only 60K different, there's a swing. It's not 100K of them are high intent MQLs. It'll be a swing towards low intent, which, again, makes this number look healthy, but the impact further down the funnel is dire.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's dive a bit deeper into the next bit of data that we can see here. So sticking with MQLs for now. Okay, let's talk about spend. Spend. Let's talk about spend. Okay, so on the spend side, the first group is Demand Gen, by the way, spent a total of 60 million within that time frame, which translates to 1.27 million per company. And the second group spent 43 million, which translates to 1.1 million per company. So actually, let's dive into this next point as well. So demand generation motion cost per MQL is $570, and lead generation strategy average cost per MQL is $262. Again, it's a volume thing as well, isn't it? Because if you're generating that level of volume of MQLs, naturally, by spending less, just kind of acquiring leads, nurturing them, scoring them to get them to MQL as cheaply as possible, these figures reflect that.
Yeah, this data is potentially a little sort of harder to unpick, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, the amount spent isn't a product of either strategy. You don't spend a certain amount on demand gen and a different amount on lead gen necessarily. You spend your marketing budget, and so the fact that these two cohorts spent different amounts is, we don't know what caused that per se.
I would argue that demand gen companies, don't know, it's not visible in this data, but I think based on what I've seen out there from other companies, those in a demand generation motion are spending more on marketing. This actually does show they're spending more on marketing anyway, because I think there is more reliance on marketing in order to do the awareness piece, do the education piece before that lead is sent to sales, because they don't really have that conversation, that educational need after they inquire with you or book that demo. They've done that entire process through marketing. So more budget is given to marketing, maybe taken away from the sales element because they're not needed to follow up with crappy leads.
That's interesting. That to me feels like a fairly mature state that I know a lot of companies are not in. And a lot of companies that are doing lead gen are effectively, demonstrably overspending on paid advertising, and that's a saving that's available. So it's interesting to see that the companies doing demand gen motions are spending more than their lead gen contemporaries here. But nevertheless, you are right in the effective lead gen generates more pipeline and revenue, so you should invest more in it. Did I say lead gen? I meant demand gen. But furthermore, this spend is what spend? Do we know that for sure? I need to remind myself.
Demand gen, there are more demand gen companies anyway.
No, but when we say a demand gen company in this report spent 60 million, spent it overall, on what?
Overall, yeah. We don't know.
What can HockeyStack measure? And is it ad spend?
It's not out. Well, we have ad spend in here.
Okay.
103 million ad spend, which is all of, that's all of them combined. Does that add up?
103 million ad spend.
This makes me think this is all ad spend then.
Well, it does add up to 103, doesn't it?
if you do the maths.
So there we go.
Right, let's take that then.
So
Well,
what we're seeing here is that in this sample size, the demand gen group spent slightly more, a fair amount more, on advertising than the lead gen group, which is actually a somewhat surprising discovery. But it speaks to a point that we identified earlier on, which is this sample size is large and broad and doesn't necessarily reflect the type of business that we or our listeners are in. And we have to bear that in mind. 2 billion ARR is a different business to 5 million ARR. So that can be part of the reason why the data that we see in this report may not be the same as data that we've seen in our, in our own worlds, listeners too. But it's just interesting. The point is more about the cost per lead versus cost per MQL. And it's unsurprising to hear that the cost per MQL is higher, but we will see that that's completely justified by the higher intent amongst those leads and the higher value they represent to the company that generated them in terms of their pipeline and their revenue.
Yeah, and that is the fundamental problem with lead generation and trying to transition to demand generation, because if you're just looking at the cost per MQL, you think, wow, the cost of lead generation is so effective, it's getting us more MQLs. If you are not tracking that through to pipeline, to revenue, like we'll see in this report, you simply just see the positive side of lead generation, which is acquiring more leads, more MQLs for cheaper, and you're blindsided by the actual conversion rate of those through the funnel to pipeline, to revenue. And you see the positives of cheap leads and not the negatives of really poor conversion rates, as we'll see.
Indeed. And I think you can maybe attest to this, but when you're using paid advertising in particular to support your demand gen strategy, is there a tendency to get better results from slightly higher cost placements and channels? Because of course you can buy a lot of Google PPC traffic and send it to a landing page to generate leads and do it quite cheaply. But if you want to create a brand affinity, real trust, real respect and preference amongst your buyers, you're not going to use Google PPC necessarily to do it. You might be incurring higher advertising costs to get in the right place and in front of the right people.
I think that's a fair point to make. I think that is fair, and you're likely naturally trying to reach more people and influence more people because you kind of need to, because you don't have that instantaneous benefit of a lead. You're working a wider audience rather than focusing on a minority of people.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't in itself justify a higher spend, but it's part of the story. I think
it's part of that spend.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll keep clicking on the wrong one. Right, there we go. Okay, let's go. About 8 or 9 MQLs. I think we've kind of laid out the points there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the difference in deals. So obviously, this is pipeline, as we mentioned in the definitions. Worth bearing in mind, every business in here will have a different definition of pipeline, so bear that in mind. But what more can you do in a report like this, right? Yeah. So let's look at the difference then. So 23,000 SQLs were generated out of 106,000 demand generation MQLs, meaning the conversion rate there was 21.5%. And although there were a lot more MQLs generated for lead generation, only 8,000 SQLs were generated out of the 164,000 MQLs, meaning the conversion rate was actually only 4.9%. So that showed that demand generation MQLs had a 4.37 times better conversion rate than lead generation MQLs. And this all comes down to intent, right?
Yeah, I mean, those numbers are stark. Not surprising, but stark. Not only was the conversion rate from MQL to SQL significantly higher for a demand generation motion, like the net number was dramatically lower from a lead generation source. So it's not like, okay, well, our rates are better, but we can still justify and defend the lead gen way of doing it. Like the number of SQLs generated, if I've got my maths straight here, was significantly better. So it's inarguable, really, that this is going to generate more in terms of pipeline value and revenue for your business, right?
Yep, totally agree. Some other points that stand out to me here is this is really where you start to see the cost of MQL fall down off a cliff. It means nothing really in a lead generation motion now. If I'm generating, if I'm generating MQLs for $262, but I can't convert them at more than 4.9%, there's little effort, trying to generate MQLs as cheaply as possible when the conversion rate is so poor into SQL.
Yeah. The other thing that stands out about this data, and certainly the conclusion, is that, again, this sample set takes in some very large businesses, and we don't know to what degree they represent the sample set, but nevertheless, the fact that business size goes up to 2 billion will mean that it includes some companies with very mature, very different go-to-markets to perhaps some of the people watching and to us. Large sales teams of SDRs calling their leads, large ad spends that not everybody has. The point I want to make is that within some of the service and SMB businesses that we've worked with over the years, I have seen more than once far, far worse lead gen performance rates, MQL to SQL conversion rate. If we call SQL pipeline, I've seen some MQL to pipeline conversion rates from lead generation from the low intent leads pretty close to zero more than once. And I've seen far higher MQL to pipeline conversion rates from businesses that take a more demand gen based approach, where their content's ungated, where they're not driving people to convert, where they're not, buying traffic to landing pages and so on. I've seen MQL to pipeline conversion rates closer to 40%. So although this data, paints a very positive picture, within certain types of business, certain types of size business, certain types of industry, you can do even better.
Yeah, you can, for sure. And I've got a couple of other points to make on this, actually. One being, this is proof that this is kind of where the inefficiencies occur beyond marketing and kind of into sales here. Because if you're sending that many leads, that many MQLs to the sales team, which ultimately this is a sales-led growth research report here. So all of those MQLs will have to be followed up by somebody, which is going to be sales. This is where the inefficiencies and the disconnect between marketing and sales occur. It's at this point here, the conversion rate from MQL to SQL. If you're sending a load of lead generation created leads from poor sources, low intent to sales that are converting at 4.9%, they're going to get pretty fed up with following up with rubbish leads that aren't converting at a high rate. They end up kind of doing their own thing and having to do things to meet their quota, right? And to meet their pipeline goal, because your leads aren't doing that for them. Whereas if they're converting those leads at 21%, they can see the success that marketing is having. That relationship is instantly better. There's not the inefficiency of following up with, that many more leads that aren't going to convert. So you've just got a more streamlined motion there from marketing and sales. It covers both ends here.
Yeah, you made two really good points there. One of which is there's a sales team, and that sales team is a cost, and that cost is not being well invested when you've got that conversion rate from MQL to SQL. We're not looking at the cost of the sales team, unsurprisingly, and not unusually within this report, but a cost it is nevertheless, a significant cost, which if you can apply it to things that have a far higher rate of return, is a much better investment. And secondly, there are plenty of situations where sales teams do have to do their own outreach, their own prospecting to a completely different cohort of contacts to the ones that marketing touch, because there's so little success from following up marketing generated low intent leads. LinkedIn's report a year or so ago, pointed out that the cohorts that the two teams, marketing and sales, touch, it has only a slight overlap, which I think is reflective of the issue, the inefficiency that you've identified here. So yeah, you can make sales a lot happier, and you can make them a lot more successful if you focus their energy on things that are going to deliver better ROI from their time.
Absolutely. Okay, anything else to cover on this deal aspect here? If not, I think we can move on.
No, let's move on.
Cover each element.
Yeah, I think that's it.
ACV is an interesting one, which is kind of, not sure it has its own section here, really. It kind of goes into deals, which is fine. This is interesting because it's not too different. And I think there's a few reasons for that. So just to summarize the data here, when it comes to ACV, yeah, there isn't a massive difference. So the issue really is converting, as we just spoken about, converting those MQLs into SQLs, and not necessarily the ACV. Like, these seem fairly similar. So on the demand gen side, the ACV is 20K. On lead generation, it's 19K. So fairly similar there.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a large sample size and product prices that don't change dramatically customer to customer, which in a lot of these business we can assume they don't, unsurprising, I think, to me, that the ACV remains relatively static. There's of course always an argument that a better quality lead will produce a higher deal value, close faster and have a larger lifetime value. But clearly it's not dramatic to the point that it's distorting ACV. To your point, this just goes to show that, from both sources, you generate the same kind of ACV, but at what cost, how efficiently, and how much of it do you generate? If the ACVs are the same, then do the thing that produces more of it, and you'll generate more pipeline.
Yeah, just a lot of businesses aren't tracking marketing all the way through to this in order to see it in the first place. The other thing that I want to add here is that I think they're probably quite similar, because once you get to pipeline, which is SQL in this report, the intent is kind of undeniable. There is intent there. At least you'd like to think. When pipeline is created, when you create a deal, there is intent to purchase. Otherwise, why would there be a deal there? How do you know the amount? You've asked these questions, you've qualified that person enough there to actually understand that there is intent to purchase. So I'm not too surprised, actually, to see ACVs fairly similar here, if I'm totally honest, because I think at that point, the intent is fairly similar.
Yeah, I mean, ACV is referring to average contract value, which I presume means deal size.
Yeah,
deal amount. Doesn't speak yet to the close rate, which we'll get onto next, but it nevertheless indicates that, however somebody arrives at your pipeline, if they're in your pipeline, hopefully there is intent to consider purchasing and purchase what you sell. So it wouldn't make sense for there to be wildly different ACVs in there anyway. Again, when you take an average, because an average is an average. Yeah. And of course, it wouldn't be right to look at pipeline values in this report, because that's not comparing apples with apples at all. So this is just reassuring, really, that if you adopt a demand gen approach to things, you're not going to see a drop off in the average contract value, but you will most likely see an increase in the number of deals in your pipeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So hard to ignore, really.
Yeah, it's a comforting thing, if anything, isn't it? It's if we do switch to demand gen from lead gen, well, we're not going to see a huge drop off in ACV. Actually, a slight improvement.
Yeah, hey, take it. Right, I'll take an extra K on every deal.
Yeah,
thanks.
More efficient MQL to SQL, more efficient sales in following up with those and converting those, and similar ACV. So, what isn't there to like?
Nothing.
Okay, shall we talk about the big boy here?
Defo.
The revenue aspect, the main one, the close rate. Okay. So just outlining some of the data here. So the demand generation, MQL side of things. So the SQL to close one conversion rate is 14.1%, whilst 11.2% for lead generation. So demand generation motion, 26% better close rate than companies in a lead generation motion.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. So once again, this is taking in a variety of businesses that may not be reflective of the people watching or ourselves. I've seen better. I've seen close rate from high intent only strategies, as it were, be significantly higher than that. So if you're a small business that hasn't yet got a large sales team, or rather a large SDR team, and doesn't have huge ad spend, you might see a close one rate that's even better than 14.1%. It's significantly higher than lead gen. It's not a world apart, but again, like you said, once they're in the pipeline, there presumably is a degree of intent and a degree of fit.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that there is a close rate and it's not zero from a lead gen strategy. And I think it almost isn't as impacted by the different approach to go to market as the other metrics, understandably, but there's a difference. Yet again, a difference. It's positive for demand gen, and I've seen it be even more positive in some of the cases where we've worked on customer pipelines.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like you said, this isn't worlds apart. I'd still say, what was it, 26%? 26% better close rate, still very good. Making incremental improvements there is ultimately where you're going to have your big wins, like where you're going to see more revenue as a company. So improving that conversion rate is very important and good to see here. But obviously, as I kind of said before, this is looking at SQL to closed one. And once something is SQL in pipeline, basically, let's actually just call it pipeline. Once it's in pipeline, there is an intent there anyway. So these two metrics aren't going to be majorly different. The main one that isn't actually called out in this graphic, that we don't see here, and I don't think we see in the table below, is the MQL to closed one metric, which is where you get the extremely stark difference between demand generation and lead generation because of the different intent there. So I went to the effort earlier to do it myself. So from a demand generation MQL to closed one in this report, the conversion rate of that is 3%. Still not that great, I don't think. We can talk about that in a sec. I expected it to be higher. But from a lead generation MQL to closed one, only 0.5%.
Wow.
0.5% of how many MQLs? 0.5% of 164,000 MQLs become customers.
Yeah. And 3% of demand gen MQLs. And the net number, again, it's like the rate is one thing. Rates are usually a good way to measure performance, but you might also get pushback because a net number is higher. But the report here says that there were 3,239 closed ones from a demand gen approach versus 907 from a lead gen approach at nearly identical ACVs. I mean, wow, it's just music to my ears, really, because, this is why we champion shifting marketing to the demand gen methodology, why we champion, combining sales and marketing measurement and KPIs and getting data flowing between the two. It's just such a massive difference. And although, of course, this report can't show it, the revenue generated, for each of those companies will be significantly in favor of demand generation. No doubt. They'll be growing faster. They'll be having a much better time of it.
And the ROI on marketing investment, the ROI on spent cost here, which is actually advertising. I think we clarified earlier. The spend on advertising here, the cost per closed one is so dramatically different. Let me bring this back up.
Yeah, lower cost per customer, and therefore almost certainly faster payback and much better utilization of the resource and investment that you're making in marketing and sales.
Yeah, the efficiencies across the board here are just incredible. And again, like, this is only looking at ad spend essentially here. When you look at cost of sales, cost of other marketing resource and budget, and the overall go-to-market spend, the actual difference in cost per closed won here would be even bigger if you took all of those things into account.
Yeah, absolutely. Make a note about one thing that's come to mind there for a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, that's why we, years ago we looked at what were leads doing, when we tried to nurture them, when we tried to score them, when we reached out to them. Okay, we had a very small business view of it, but nevertheless, I was satisfied that it wasn't, us and our approach that was the problem. It was that buyers didn't want to engage the way that we were trying to engage them, and so we sort of shifted subtly, sort of not totally knowingly, but from lead gen to demand gen. We said, why pay to store leads in our CRM and our marketing automation platform and have the ability to email them if they do not want to receive those emails, and it doesn't make them buy from us, doesn't make them want to buy from us at all. So we shifted away from that and enjoyed the benefits all that time ago.
Yeah. And obviously, when it comes back to this report and the data and the sample size within this, yeah, it might not be totally accurate for your business. So I would say the data that you actually see here within the report itself, you should be doing this for your own business. If you are considering the shift from lead gen to demand gen and you haven't yet looked at the differences here, like this data in this table, I could only urge you to go and do this analysis for your own business. It's highly likely you'll see numbers similar to this. But if you don't, then prove it for yourself. This is the best way to look at a side-by-side comparison. MQL, 2 pipeline, 2 closed won, cost per closed won. Look at the efficiencies, the inefficiencies within that themselves. And you could go a step further here. You could add, CAC payback period, sales investment, like other marketing investment here, and really go to town on this analysis. This is just a really great report and an overview of kind of something that needed to be done in the market, and will give you that arm if you need it. But the best way to prove this is to go ahead and do it for yourselves in your own business and look at this analysis directly with your own data.
I've got a question for you, Dan.
Oh dear.
One of the objections, and there is often organizational resistance to making this sort of change. And actually, Janberg, who led this report, who's done a brilliant job here and at Cognism and in his career, he made the point that he faced quite staunch organizational resistance to making these kinds of changes, taking these kind of risks, although they're clearly not risky. Now we know this. One of the objections, or one of the pushbacks that marketers might receive is, well, although the revenue generated, or the rate at which it's generated from lead gen, is, far, far lower than demand gen, let's have both. It's still revenue, and that revenue plus demand gen revenue is more revenue. So the question, or rather questions, is, can businesses do both demand generation and lead generation at the same time? And if so, should they?
My question back to them would probably be, would you rather have a cost per closed one of $18,000, or would you rather have a cost per closed one of $47,000? We can do both if you want to have both of those things. But if you just want to have cost per closed one at $18,000, we should reinvest our budget into demand gen activity. If you're happy spending nearly $50,000 to get a closed one, ATV of $19,000, okay, let's do both.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I suspect that there still might be occasions when the answer back to that is yes. Because again, it's still 3,239 closed won deals plus 907 closed won deals. Some of them are very expensive, some of them are very cheap, but I'd rather have them all. But I suppose, so just to drill in, the question again, can businesses do both demand generation and lead generation effectively at the same time, or are they opposing forces?
I think they are opposing. And the thing is, which this report doesn't take into account, is actually the closed won. All of the successful MQLs that have gone on to pipeline, gone on to closed won, are probably just part of that demand gen cohort anyway.
Yeah, good point.
Because within this report, it's not defining MQL. It's not splitting out lead generation MQLs here from gated content. It's not doing a split funnel analysis into sources of those lead generation MQLs. It's just bundling them all together.
Yeah. The way I think about it is that, you know, if you want to do lead generation, then you have to optimize for it. And if you optimize for it, you're not going to be optimizing for demand gen style high intent lead generation. And yet, if you were to optimize for that, you would get significantly more high intent MQLs, significantly more opportunities, and significantly more closed won deals. So it's extremely inefficient and inadvisable to try to do both. And it's hard to, it's impossible to optimize for both, because you're going to have to optimize for lead generation over demand generation, and that will hold your demand generation results back by virtue of and nature of the way that you're hiding content, where you're advertising, how you're advertising, and where you're sending people to. But I suspect that marketers will frequently hear, let's do both, as a sort of, as a resistance when the data isn't clear enough, you know, to those that need to see it. Another point I wanted to bring up was the role of the website in this picture, because attribution models tend to focus heavily on channels and paid advertising spend. Reports like this reflect the whole customer journey, but nevertheless, website user experience hasn't been mentioned here. And a demand gen methodology basically relies on a buyer coming to your website and expressing their intent and their interest through it. So it plays a crucial, vital role in an effective demand generation machine. We've seen many times over that it's a big lever that you can pull, and it may be the lever that gets you from that 21% conversion rate up to 40%. If you actually take the time to analyze your website's user experience, customer journey, and optimize it for B2B buyers who are making their own decision about what to buy and who to talk to.
Yeah, I think, well, that report actually probably misses the conversion point where a good website UX and a good website actually can make all the difference, which is the traffic number into those high intent leads. Because if you're optimizing for demand generation, your website, your UX and everything is playing to that, you can ensure like an optimal experience for your user to enter your funnel, essentially. Your high intent funnel. If you've got a lead generation website and it's geared towards capturing as many kind of low intent leads as possible to inflate your numbers, it's likely to have a poorer UX. You'll have pop-ups kind of all over the places, CTAs that aren't necessarily bottom of funnel, leading people to content that isn't necessarily relevant to where they are in their journey. So I'd love to see that on the next report.
Yeah, it's an interesting area. We've seen many times over that, you know, adopting an effective B2B buyer optimized UX can increase high intent or MQL generation rates by significant proportions, hundreds of percent sometimes. And it's therefore worthwhile investing in creating that website, removing the blockers, removing the friction, removing the missteps that have been made in terms of user experience, content design, you know, the whole lot, and continuing to invest in that website over time. You know, the image that's conjured up by a lot of online discussion, reports like these, and vendor talk is that everything's down to the way you advertise, and that's an important part of it, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah, unless you wanted to move on. I actually wanted to rewind and just go back, because I noted something down as we were talking about doing both. Like, going back to that point, can you do both? Can you do lead gen? Can you do demand gen? Funnily enough, lead generation businesses, people that are focused on a lead generation motion, are actually doing demand gen without knowing it.
True.
So if you were to split out those lead generation leads that you get from gated content, webinars, just low intent, low quality, not actual declared intent on your website, with those that are declared intent, what you'll find is those that do come to you freely, declare their intent, have had their demand created and generated without you actually trying to do it or knowing you've done it, but that demand has been created. You've just captured it. Like, it's been created, who knows, peer to peer, in a community, on social. They might have just not clicked through to your lead generation form in your campaign. You haven't tracked it, but that you're still doing demand gen and you're actually still measuring it in some ways. You just haven't split it out. So
yeah,
just an interesting thought I had there.
And that goes back to that point about MQLs with that lead scoring rule, demo request equals 100 points, because what we noticed is the people that stayed anonymous up until the point where they expressed their intent via a high intent form were the ones that converted into opportunities in pipeline and bought. And they got there despite the fact our marketing was at the time optimized for lead generation. They just hadn't filled in any of the forms, downloaded any of the content. So the demand had been created and captured by the bits of our content and the bits of our brand that they could see without giving up their anonymity and privacy. And that is effectively demand generation. You're just not optimized for it. And when you do optimize for it, you can significantly push up the amount of inquiries you get of that type. So it is, like you say, it's always present. It's just the degree to which you're specializing in it.
Yeah,
very true.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's always interesting. And this report just totally backs up what we've seen, in terms of the challenges that teams face, the inefficiencies that are present when you look closely, and the opportunity that demand generation presents amongst B2B buyers who today, don't want to receive spam, don't want to be bothered and burdened, and prefer to, do their research anonymously, privately amongst their communities and so on and so forth. It's a really big opportunity for lots of businesses to grow faster and make much better use of their spend on either marketing, advertising, sales, their website, etc.
Yeah, probably couldn't summarize it better. It's just another nail in the coffin, isn't it, for lead generation, and just summarizes exactly why there are so many inefficiencies in it, poor ROI in it.
It is. And I mean, I come back to the thought, to the fact that actually still, there are still times, places, and ways that lead generation gets defended, or the risk of making this change gets taken too seriously and denied. And I would love if anybody came on, now or after the event, to share the reasons that they've heard that, we should keep doing lead generation, or no, lead generation is right for us and demand generation isn't right for us. Because, it's so clear when you look at data like this that there's a case for demand generation, and yet we know that in so many situations people are struggling to adopt it, and that can only be because they're encountering resistance, reluctance, or opposition from somewhere within their operation. And it's really interesting to hear what those explanations are like.
Well, let's do an episode on it.
All right,
that's objections for making the shift.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
I've got a few in mind that I've encountered.
Yeah, same. And I'd love to hear what other people have encountered.
Let's do it next time. Maybe not next time. We'll do it
soon.
In the next 3 episodes, let's say.
Sounds good.
Okay. Right. I think wrap it up there, shall we? I think also, just to thank HockeyStack, really, for producing that report, because it is fantastic and such, hopefully, an eye-opener to a lot of people, and something that they can really use to make a successful shift in their organization from lead gen to demand gen, make them better companies, make them more efficient, spend money better. It's good stuff all around. So really, really great for them. But wrap it up there.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. You can follow the Blend LinkedIn page to join any future live events with us, and watch any or listen to any previous episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere really. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye everyone.
Bye.